Hello and welcome to The Luxury of Choice, a business-to-business sales skills and tips podcast brought to you by the training team of George James Limited. My name is Steve Vaughan, I'm a senior sales trainer at George James Limited, and I'm joined once again by my two colleagues, Pru Layton and Jonathan Cooper. So Pru, Jonathan, how's your week been? One of you.
Well, I'll go first this time, but last time I remember interrupting Pru, so that's why I was hesitant. It's been a good week. Yeah, a wide variety of things, and trying to move house at the moment, so that always adds a degree of excitement.
Absolutely, it's one of the most stressful things you can do, isn't it? Moving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. How about you, Pru? How's your week been?
It's been a good week. I've had a nice combination, Steve, of being out and about for the first few days, which I always enjoy. And I was doing some remote training yesterday for right across the globe, from India to the USA.
Amazing, the power of Zoom, eh? Yeah, and similar for me, it's been a sort of a remote kind of week for me as well. So we're getting some feedback now. Now we've done a couple of these podcasts, and it's great. And thanks ever so much for you, the listener, for sending in your feedback. We'd love to hear what you think about the show, any suggestions for what you'd like us to do in the future. But one of the things we did get back was that they'd like to know a little bit more about ourselves and our background. So I think it would be good if we can, guys, just to take a couple of minutes just to introduce who we are, what we do, where we come from, if you like, and what sort of qualifies us, if anything, really, to talk about the topics that we talk about. So perhaps, Jonathan, I could start with you. So in a minute or two, could you just give a brief overview of yourself, your background, and any particular areas of focus you have within the training team?
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. And thank you. Yeah, so I'm a chemist by training, and have to say, not a very good one either. So I never really excelled at school. I never excelled when I went into further education. Although I have to say, my 4 years at Sheffield Polytechnic were incredibly helpful and put me back on a really good pathway. I almost sort of fell into a commercial role. I knew I didn't want to go into a lab. And I'd had 2 6-month placements in industry, which were really interesting, but it really helped me understand that I wanted a commercial career. Yeah, I found my way in, and first job was in inside sales. I then moved into a regional sales management role, and then field sales, then regional sales management, and ultimately across a number of companies, gained some experience at a national UK level, then European global level, and ultimately in a global leadership role as well. And yeah, had some tremendous experiences, had some great successes, some failures too, of course, haven't we all? Learned an awful lot. And I guess I always feel a little bit of a fraud, because when I think about how much there is to know about selling, even after all of my years, which I'll probably reveal, 39 years of being in a sales environment, I think I probably know about a third of what there is to know, maybe less. People who know me well can make a better judgment of that. But things I love training around sales process and forecasting. Absolutely, always found that really good, because I just think it just gives it a great base to everything else we do. And qualification, particularly, I've always found it intriguing how people think. In a very complex sale, particularly in strategic type selling, I've always found it very interesting to figure out the motivations of people, how people all link together, how they interact with each other, and how that might influence the sale. Ultimately, of course, we're trying to establish who's going to make the decision. So I would say that those things were most interest to me. So there we go. I think I've made it in about 2 minutes, Steve. Cheers.
Thanks, Jonathan. We're going to talk about qualification in a minute or two. And of course, we should say that you're one of the original founders of our company as well, of course. Pru, over to you. A bit more about yourself, if we could.
Okay. Well, I'm also a chemist. You'll listeners, you'll spot a scheme in a minute. But I'd like to say I thought I was quite a good chemist, actually. And I was really, really dedicated at school. Your classic girly swat, homework always in on time. And I ended up thinking I would love life in a lab. And I did spend 5 years working in labs. But looked around me and for some role models about people who'd been there for many years and thought, is that what I want to do in 10 years' time? And quickly realised it wasn't. Totally unsure about what else to do. And luckily for me, a job came up on the board where I worked for a salesperson. I would love to tell you that that's what I really wanted to do. But actually, what I really wanted was the company car. It was astonishing that there was a job that had a car. So I applied for the company car. I got the company car. But what it turned out was that I got this sales role and I loved it. Almost from the start. I felt it was a real privilege going, visiting all sorts of customers, doing all sorts of things. How lucky was I? And a little like Jonathan, been in sales since 1988. I can't do the maths, but you can work it out. And had a lot of moves from company to company and role to role. And 10 years ago, I joined Jonathan in the training team. And the reason I joined, I think, is I'd achieved a lot. But when I reflected on the part of my role that I enjoyed the most, it was really getting people to have the confidence in the abilities that I saw in them. I absolutely loved it. It was really rewarding. And so training works really well for that. And I have the privilege, like I did in my first sales role, of going inside lots and lots of different organisations. And it is a great thing to do. Mm-hmm. So in terms of what do I specialise in here? I could be really glib and say whatever the customer asks. However, what I will say is I really, really love working with people who are coming into their first sales role, setting them on the right path, starting to give them some confidence that they were hired for all the right reasons. It's very rewarding and they're very enthusiastic. And equally working with sales leadership. I think my first sales leadership role, I was delighted to get the promotion. Obviously didn't get a pay rise because, as the company said, they were developing me, so I shouldn't expect any extra money. And I accepted that. But really, I was given it because I was good at sales. So working with sales leaders and giving them some structure and some ways of working is really rewarding. So I guess I would say those are the things that I love doing the most.
Fantastic, Pru. Thank you. And I'm going to complete the set. I'm a chemist as well, although I was, again, a long time ago. I was a research chemist. I worked as a synthetic chemist for a couple of years. I used to make pesticides. In fact, I'm still in touch with some of the guys I used to work with all those years ago. But pretty much like you, Pru, I reckon that I probably wasn't going to be doing that for the rest of my life. Saw these people coming into the lab trying to sell us things, and I thought, I could do that. Yeah, they get a company car, as you mentioned. And like the rest of you, really, I've spent most of my working life in sales and sales management roles for a variety of companies. I've worked in the UK. I've worked in the States. I lived in the States for 3 years. We were living in New York during September the 11th, 2001, which, of course, has just come around recently as well in terms of the date. Worked for UK companies. I worked for American companies. I worked for Japanese companies, which is a real privilege. But like the both of you, really, I think the thing I've really enjoyed most of all about being a manager was seeing my team get on and achieve their potential. So I'm the new boy, or at least I am at the moment. I've been with the company for 4 years now. Although we do have some more people joining us soon, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a future podcast. And in terms of what I particularly like, again, whatever the customer would like us to cover, but things I'm really interested in is how do we fill the funnel? The thing we talked about in our first show, how do we find new customers? How do we prospect? How do we hunt for business? I'm also particularly interested in things like social selling and using social media, power of LinkedIn. For those of you that follow me on LinkedIn, I'm quite active on there. And also channel management and distribution management. I've worked on both sides of that relationship. I've worked for manufacturers who sold through channel partners, and I work for channel partners on behalf of manufacturers. So really enjoy training people in those particular areas as well. So, okay, well, thanks, guys. That's been really useful, I hope, for the listener. Just get a little bit more of a feel for who we are and what we do, really. So let's now move on to today's topic that we're going to look at from a sales perspective. And you used the word a minute ago, Jonathan, qualification. Now, qualification is one of those words in English that can mean lots of different things. I think sometimes it can mean a certificate on the wall. It can mean getting your football team into a particular tournament. Not that applies to my team very often. But in sales, it means something a little bit different. So I'm going to start with you, Pru, I think. So in terms of what qualification is, what is qualification from a sales perspective?
Actually, I was training qualification yesterday, so I should be really
fresh
good
in mind,
at this, Steve. For me, qualification is that step where we move somebody, an organisation or a contact who has presented as a lead, showing initial interest, to actually being a fully qualified lead, which then makes them a sales opportunity. So it's that part where we move them from interest to saying, hey, I've qualified them, and I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about that now, to say that they really are a sales opportunity. I can see that there's a potential that we are going to be able to do business with them.
Right. So this is right at the start of the sales process. This is kind of at the top of the funnel, Jonathan. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, very, very much so. I mean, my definition would be really similar to Pru's. For me, qualification is all about understanding, as we go through that process that Pru described, whether or not we're going to be able to win this deal. You know, I think some of the great training I've had around this in my lifetime, when I was first a salesperson, really helped me understand the importance of making that assessment very, very early in the sales process. Is this an opportunity or is this a lead we ultimately want to play and turn that into an opportunity? Do we want to play it or not? I think one of the things that most of the listeners will probably recognise is that phrase, if you're going to lose it, lose fast and lose early. Always a really smart thing to do. Unless, of course, you're going to go lose it for very, very good strategic reasons. Maybe that could be a discussion today or another time. But for me, I think immediately as we start to qualify the customers we engage with, I think starting to think about how we're going to go about winning that deal is really, really important. Maybe after a one or more initial conversations, we decide actually this isn't one that we play. Maybe it's better for another day. Perhaps it's one that we abandon completely. Okay, but I think what is important is that great qualification for me is all about making that decision early. Do we play this or do we pass? And if we do play it, can we immediately start to see one or two steps that we could take or a pathway to actually winning this deal ultimately? Now, of course, in a very complex sale, it might not be possible to see the full pathway, but I think to start thinking about that pathway from the very beginning is really important. So, that's how I see it.
So I think there's a number of factors there in what you mentioned, and I think for perhaps a new salesperson or an experienced salesperson listening to this, what you've just said might be quite controversial, really, in some respects. The fact that you might decide quite early on that when you get a lead from a customer that you don't want to work on it, really. What kind of things, is it not just our customers are all selling technical products. We've all come from that background, scientific instruments, life science, biotechnology, and so on. Is it not just a case, Pru, of asking them lots of technical questions to see if we can do what they want? Or is it a bit more nuanced than that?
Of course, we need to understand at the highest level, have we got something that fits technically their requirements? But it's a lot more than that, isn't it? It has to be a lot more than that because, on reflection, when I first started in sales, the idea that I didn't have to chase every single little inquiry was quite a surprise. That there were some leads that were more attractive than others. So, it is more nuanced, Steve, in terms of technically there has to be a strong fit between what you have and what the customer wants. But that doesn't lead to a sale, does it? There's a whole host of other things that have to be aligned in order to have a successful sale for you as a salesperson, which is how you're measured. So, as an example, have they got any money? You could have the best. You could have the most ideal solution for them, and technically they could really want it. You may even do an amazing demo or trial or whatever it is, but without sounding too harsh, if there's no money attached to this desire, it's never going to be a sales opportunity, is it?
That's a really good point, really. And I can think of lots of examples, and I'm sure we all can in our career, where perhaps we've done work on an opportunity which, we kind of think, oh, they'll get some money sometime, and in practice they never do, really. To follow that through, Jonathan, is that saying that we would never, ever work on an opportunity that isn't immediately funded? Or is there some more sophistication around that at all?
It's a really good discussion point. I mean, I think maybe I look at it oversimplistically, but I think I look at it really on two fronts, really. If you just take the specific example of money, right, have they got the money? Yes or no? Okay. And is that money in place now, or is it going to be in place in the near future? Or actually, do they have a track record as a customer, of being able to raise money and being able to find money? And I've met some incredibly talented customers in my lifetime who pretty much said to me, look, Jonathan, don't worry, I'll find the money. And they've been able to do that, right? And when you just have to look around their laboratory to see that they've been very successful over the years at raising money. I think it's always a great place to start, and it's a key part of any qualification. But I think, as has been alluded to here, it's amazing how many times salespeople with a very technical background, who've got a great scientific background and maybe very, very strong, their conversations are very focused around the technical side of things, the science side of things. And the commercial piece, I wouldn't say it's abandoned, but we don't go into anywhere near as much depth on the commercial side as we do on the technical side. And then I'd add a third dimension, which is the people involved themselves. I mean, one of the very first things I was taught, I think it's why when I became a salesperson, I think it was one of the things, I alluded to it earlier, that I found so fascinating. It was figuring out, I think as I was taught it at the time, it was all about buyer motivation. So, what is motivating this person to make that decision? And then it was apparent to me, right, emotions are important, right? They're really important in selling. And that became a fascinating element of it to me. So, yes, there is this technical and scientific clinical piece on one side, but on the other, there's this commercial piece, and intertwined with that are the motivations of all of the people involved, whether they're decision makers or influencers, their own personal motivations, which you have to figure out. So,
Sure.
In a very complex sale, multiple stakeholder groups, multiple stakeholders, there's an awful lot to do sometimes from the qualification. And
absolutely.
And I know you'll want Pru to speak in a moment, Steve. I think the one thing that I would add to it as well, because it's just so fascinating for me, and it's why I love the sales process, is that there is this huge pull, right, in the sales process, this huge desire when, as a salesperson with a strong scientific or clinical background, you've often got this fascination in the products. I mean, some of the products I've sold in my lifetime, they were amazing, what they could do with the customers. And, you've got all of that enthusiasm and passion for what you're selling, and you're desperate to tell the customer all about it. But no, we know that is very rarely the best approach. To really understand that customer first across some of these dimensions we've discussed. And at that moment, I'll let you pick it up again, Steve. Thank you. Well, all without drawing breath.
I'll edit out the breaths later. Pru, you're nodding furiously there in Jonathan's piece there, particularly when he was talking about the money part of it and the importance of asking the money question. And I know when we train qualification, key part of what we offer, salespeople will often say, well, I don't want to talk about the money too early. I don't want to come across as being pushy, or I don't want to come across as being too aggressive. So how do we do that in a way that isn't seen as being pushy or aggressive?
I think it's understanding how important it is from the customer viewpoint to get an initial understanding of what the budget is looking like or what their funding is looking like. Because you could do a customer a real disservice by forming a solution that is way above what they can afford to have. So it's not that you are going to find out early on about what kind of budget's attached to this project or this new acquisition. It's like we need that in order to make sure that we formulate something that doesn't just meet what they need technically, but meets what they can afford. Because we don't want to disappoint customers or lead them on by talking about something which they subsequently can't have when some number of meetings down you go, oh, right, well, you can't have any of those things then. And that's also, I don't think, respectful of absolutely. Working collaboratively or consultatively with a customer.
I'm trying to think, what was the game show where it used to say, let's have a look at what you could have won? Was that Bullseye all those years ago? I just
can't think it was, actually. Yeah, that's right, yeah. And it was normally, a
speedboat.
Like a speedboat, and they lived in a big city somewhere, but they had a speedboat now.
They lived in Wolverhampton, but they had a speedboat. Completely digressing from the topic. But you make a really good point. So, in other words, there's no point offering something that is really high-end if the customer's got mid-range budget, really. It's an obvious thing to do, isn't it, Pru? Yeah.
We're starting to formulate a technical solution that they subsequently are unable to have. Because I think it just doesn't, it just doesn't work. And I think sometimes when I talk to salespeople about asking about budget very early during the qualification stage, as we said, above the sales funnel, a lot of them say to me, oh, I'm not sure that's okay. I go, well, try it. And when they come back, they go, actually, they were very happy to tell me, and I think that customers also need to share with you, as well as this performance, this is what I've got to operate in. What's the very best you can give me with these limits that I have? So I think if we look at it that way, it doesn't feel quite so uncomfortable to ask that question.
Absolutely. And we were recently working, I think all of us, with the customer, and one of their salespeople came up with a really great point, which I've remembered.
Yeah, they did.
And that was, if the customer asks me about the price, I've got an absolute entitlement to ask about the budget, which I think is great. And I've remembered that ever since. It was a really great point. If the customer wants to know how much it is, we're entitled to say, well, how much
it was brilliant, wasn't it? Absolutely. Yeah.
So technical qualification, budget qualification. You've kind of also alluded, Jonathan, to understanding who's going to be involved in the purchase. Isn't that a difficult thing to find out right at the get-go, though? Would people know that kind of stuff right at the very early stages of a sales opportunity?
No, I think in some cases that's probably absolutely the case. I mean, why do we go into selling? Why do we do it? Why do we enjoy it?
Well, company car for me and Pru.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. She enjoys it until the moment she gets out of the car. Yeah, but for me, it was I know she'll have a counter to that. That to me is one of the most interesting parts of selling. It's actually figuring out with all of these people you meet and the different personas they have, and the different roles they perform, the different positions in the organization. It's figuring out who will make the decision, who will influence the decision, right? Who might support you in that decision, who might work against you, who are the people we haven't seen that might be actually working for another solution that actually, are just at this point are just invisible to us. So working that out for me is absolutely a part of the enjoyment of it. And I think if you can learn to enjoy that part of the sales process and that part of qualification, it helps you enormously. I think a great word here is curiosity, right? It's about being curious for me, taking a genuine interest in the customer and genuine interest in people. I could use the word nosy as well. I'm going to reference my eldest daughter now, right? She's nosy, right? She isn't a salesperson, but she could be, because she's really good, really trying to understand people. Okay, and I've watched salespeople, who are a little bit nosy, who are certainly curious, understand all sorts of things that somebody who didn't ask the questions failed to understand. There's no question it gives you a competitive advantage, right? And I've got this theory, which over the years I've never been able to prove. And I guess it's a big regret that I never gathered the data over the years to prove this. But I've always asked this question about qualification. I asked the question, when does the customer actually make the decision to buy? Now, hey, we might walk into some customers sometimes, they've already made the decision. Actually, I'm buying from somebody else, but I need a couple of other companies to make up the numbers. Maybe that'll be a discussion for another day. Sometimes you walk in and they've already made the decision to buy from you. But what about all of those that have not yet made a decision, who genuinely haven't, right? They may have a leaning one way or the other. But for those who haven't made a decision, I fundamentally believe, and it'd be great to get some listener feedback on this, that the quality of your qualification, will pretty much determine the outcome. And I've certainly seen in many complex sales, if you've done a fantastic job qualifying that customer across the stakeholders and stakeholder groups, by the time you come out of qualification, the decision is leaning heavily towards you. And it's just an observation that I've made and over the years. And most of the certainly the more complex sales that I've been involved with, where I've been able to perform that great qualification and got a really clear view at the end of it, what this customer is about, who's going to make this decision. I think the quality of your questioning, the interest you've taken, sends a very powerful message to the customer. Sure. Again, look, I'm sure that somebody's far cleverer than me, has written a book about this. But I think it's worth considering, right? The quality of that qualification, might actually lead to you being able to get some sort of commitment at the qualification stage of the sales process. It impacts other things as well, as we know. Your ability to secure, a good deal at the end of the day, of course, is very strongly connected to it. We know that. But that would just be some additional thoughts for me about qualification. Huge topic.
It is, and we could spend probably several episodes talking just about that. In terms of the stages of qualifications, Pru, so all the various things we need to think about. So we've talked about budget, we've talked about technical needs, we've talked about who else is involved. What other things do we need to think about from a qualification point of view, if anything?
Well, I think there's a couple of others that come to mind, really, Steve. I think one is about getting our timing right. There's always a pressure inside any sales organisation to get things done quickly. Right. To say, what can we get in this quarter before the end of the year? And sometimes we don't really kind of check that out with the customer. So I think when I'm qualifying, or when I talk about qualifying, because of course we do this as well in our day-to-day work as well as training it. We do. Understanding the timeline is so important as part of, when do we need to do which part of the sales process? When's it appropriate to do certain things? So right up front, checking out with customers, when do you need this to happen? Why is that date so important? And if that date slipped, if for any reason you couldn't achieve that date, what would the consequences be? Because I certainly know when I look at myself and other people that I work with, we often very quickly work out exactly what it is a customer is going to buy. We technically qualify them so well that we can identify the right product or solution for them. The thing we get wrong is the when. When are they actually going to do it? And it's rarely sooner. What usually happens is when we update our pipelines or our funnels, we move the close date out and out and out, because we never understood during qualification that they had an ambition to do something by then, but didn't get them to think, or you understand the consequence of that slipping. And we all know things slip. Absolutely. Who's ever had a product launch that's happened on time? I've certainly never experienced a product that comes out when they say it's going to. It just doesn't happen. And it's the same with our customers. They often are in the same sort of world as we are. So understanding that time thing up front is so important.
Some really great points there. I think often if we don't understand that properly, we can create stress in our own organisation, because the customers say, I must have it by the 1st of October. So then we go into hyperdrive trying to get it delivered and installed by the 1st of October. And we never stop to ask the question, well, why? And what will happen?
Yeah.
And what will happen if we can't?
The missing question in qualification. Yeah. We don't ask enough why questions.
Exactly. Okay? And sometimes they've just pulled a date out of thin air, or it just would be a convenient date for whatever reason. And I think the other point, and I'm sure we'll come on to this, Jonathan, in another show, is the impact of good qualification on forecasting.
Correct. I mean, Pru hit the nail on the head at its simplest level. Most of the time, in most of the companies we work in this type of industry, people, and I've been there, made the mistakes, forecast accuracy on what the customer will buy is actually extraordinarily high in most cases. It is the when. One thing I would just immediately say about that would be, one of the things that's least often qualified effectively, is the strategic importance of the purchase that's about to be made. Now, again, there will be some purchases that are made from an operational budget, where that money that it's coming from has already been basically approved. But where there's any significant capital spend, or maybe it's a big consumable or reagent deal where they've had to apply for separate funding, I think sometimes we get a little bit blinded. We meet scientists who are doing some amazing work, who are passionate about what they're doing, and for them, they're the only game in town in their own organisation, right? But that's what makes them great at what they do. They truly believe in their projects. And I think sometimes we don't take the blinkers off to consider, well, actually, is this a good investment for the company or the organisation that is potentially going to fund this? Or are there other things in the organisation that they will fund instead ahead of this? So I think one of Pru's questions she asked earlier, related to this. So I think just trying to understand the strategic importance is critical to understanding that timeline. When will ultimately the cash be made available to buy what it is they're looking to buy?
I can think of examples, Jonathan, in my own career where the customer's got an end-of-year pot of money, there's money been made available, or there's budget to spend, and we think, great, woohoo, there's some money there, but what we don't realise is actually there's 10 different departments all chasing that money. And we just think it's allocated to our project.
I've been caught with that before years ago.
And that takes me to another topic, which I'd like to explore with you, Pru, which is, and we've kind of touched on it there a little bit, which is competition, really. In that respect, is competing for money. But we work with some very, very high-tech companies who've got some wonderful technology, but very rarely are the only game in town. There's usually some competitor, if perhaps a different technology, as opposed to an out-and-out manufacturer selling a similar product to yourself. So what's the significance of the importance of qualification with regards to competition, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's another thing that we know is really important to find out early, to really know how am I going to approach, what's my strategy to win this sale, by knowing what you're up against. And I guess there's a number of different forms of competition. One could be they may have their current supplier or somebody they currently use. It's interesting to know early on if you're currently using this supplier, what would make you change? Because you could, as you said it, Jonathan, sometimes you're involved in what looks like a potential sale, but you're just making the numbers up. And do you want to do that or not? If people have good reasons about where they want improvements or why they may consider changing, and we ask that early in qualification, then we can use that information appropriately. It's rare, almost. I don't know how rare it is, but it's very rare that if you're making a significant investment, you're only going to speak to one organisation.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of really credible options. Customers have choice. So knowing during qualification who else they're considering allows you to manage the subsequent conversations to start to demonstrate and highlight some of your unique selling points. And it allows you to maybe counter what you think the competition may say about yours. For anything, it's hard to show the customer everything. We always have to select what the customer sees.
Absolutely.
And so having a view of what else and who else they're considering, I think gives us an advantage of knowing that. I've had some salespeople say, I don't really want to ask that. I go, okay, why not? And they'll say, well, they might not have thought about it. And I'm like, really? Really?
I heard of something called Google, yes.
A little quick search will tell them people who are in this space. So let's not think our customers are that naive.
Yeah, great point.
I've never lost an order because I've asked the questions. I've lost the order because I haven't.
Because I didn't.
Right.
Yeah, completely.
And I think I think you can get away with a lot with a smile. But I think also when it comes to questioning, I think just helping the customer understand why you're asking the question you're asking. If you just deliver the question, I think it makes less sense. And it means less to the customer than if you actually give a reason. The reason I asked this question, I'm going to ask you this question, is because. I think that can help. And Pru, just love that little review. As my first sales manager taught me, he will remain nameless. He's retired, but thank you, Brian. Okay. He let me lose an order one day when he said when I'd said to him, I've got no competition for this sale, no competition. And he just let me lose it. It was a really brave thing to do on his part, but goodness me, that was the best lesson I've ever had. Right. Never say to yourself you have no competition. There's always competition, right? Even if it's to do nothing. Lethargy. I can't be bothered. It's a big change for me. I have to change my methodologies.
Good point.
Or, wow, that new technology is too scary from where I am today. There's always competition. There's always competition, even if it's to do nothing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great point. So, really great discussion, guys, on qualification. I just want one more question, if I can, of you, Pru, really, and that is we said at the get-go of this session that qualification was something that we did at the start of the sales process before, to use your phrase, Jonathan, we decided if we were going to play or not play. But is that the only time we qualify, or do we carry on qualifying all the way down the process?
Well, thank you for giving me the right answer, Steve, so I'll get it right. for those of us, if you look at a lot of sort of sales blogs and sales training, there's this acronym ABC, always be closing. So this is the idea that we're always trying to close customers or get commitment. But we know in the industry that we operate in that actually ABQ, always be qualifying, is the right thing to do. Because things change as a sale develops, as the team that you're speaking to develops. So the views that you got in the early days or when you first engage with them inevitably will be changing. So we should always be checking our qualification. And when you look at it, they're all really valuable questions to be asking from different people at different times to get the current state. So yeah, we should always be qualifying. And it's a great structure for some very nice set of questions to ask customers, to be honest.
Absolutely. Always be qualifying, always be closing, and I'll add another, always be prospecting as well to our first podcast.
ABP.
So what we're really saying is always be working every part of the sales process.
I guess that's right. Yeah. I guess
all of the time.
That's the secret. Yeah. Great.
So, Pru, Jonathan, thanks again for your time today. It's been really insightful. So we're going to be back again with another Luxury Choice Sales Skills and Knowledge podcast in a month's time. However, don't forget that we've now got an extra mid-month podcast called the Luxury Choice Interviews. And our first interview show went live a couple of weeks ago and featured a discussion between myself and Sharon Eaton, who's the owner of Buyer Channel Partners. And we talked all about getting the best from your distribution network. Now, over the next few weeks, we're going to have a variety of guests covering a whole range of topics, such as life science marketing, mental health and well-being, sales leadership, and many other topics. So don't forget to subscribe to the show, tell your colleagues and, of course, all your friends about the show. And we'd also love to hear your feedback and thoughts about what you'd like to talk about. We can each be contacted on our LinkedIn profiles, details of which are on the show notes. You can also email the show at podcasts@georgejames-training.com. And don't forget to check out the useful sales articles and information, as well as the details of our sales and management courses on our website, which is georgejames-training.com. Until then, folks, we'll see you next time.